You need to understand this because the shame an avoidant carries after hurting you rarely looks like what you expect, and that mismatch is what keeps you trapped in questions. You're waiting for a confession that sounds like compassion. You're waiting for an apology that sounds like accountability. You're waiting for a moment where they finally admit, I know what I did and I'm sorry. But the avoidance shame doesn't usually come out as honesty. It comes out as distance. It comes out as silence. It comes out as a coldness that looks like indifference because for them, admitting the truth doesn't just mean acknowledging your pain. It means facing themselves, and that is the very thing they are trained to avoid because shame is not the same as guilt. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am wrong. And when someone is wired to protect themselves from intense emotion, shame feels like exposure. It feels like being caught. It feels like standing under a bright light with nowhere to hide. So instead of leaning in, instead of saying the words that would bring you relief, they lean out, they disappear, they detach, they act like it didn't matter. Because if they admit it mattered, they have to admit they caused damage. And if they admit they caused damage, they have to admit they are capable of being the villain in someone else's story. For a person who survives by maintaining control and self-image, that is terrifying. So what happens is this: they will hurt you. And then the moment they sense your emotion, the moment they sense the weight of your disappointment, they retreat even more. They might tell themselves they needed space. They might say you're too intense. They might label the whole thing as drama. But often beneath those words is a quieter truth. They can't bear the feeling of being responsible for your pain. Not because they don't care at all, but because the way they learned to cope with closeness was to shut off. And when shame rises, shutting off becomes their reflex. It is easier to look away than to look at what they did. It is easier to act unaffected than to sit in the discomfort of your tears and say, I see you, I'm sorry, I didn't handle this right. And this is why it feels so brutal to you. Because you don't just lose the relationship, you lose reality. You're standing there with the emotional evidence, your heartbreak, your confusion, the sleepless nights, the replaying of conversations, the what did I do wrong? And they are walking away as if the page is blank. That makes you question yourself. That makes you shrink. That makes you think maybe I'm being dramatic. Maybe I asked for too much. Maybe my needs are too heavy. But your needs were not too heavy. They were simply landing on a person who experiences emotional responsibility as danger. And let me say this gently because it matters. An avoidant can feel shame and still never give you closure. They can care and still stay silent. They can miss you and still act cold. Because shame doesn't always move someone toward repair. Sometimes shame moves them toward self-protection. It makes them defensive. It makes them rewrite the story. It makes them convince themselves that you are the problem. Because if you were the problem, they don't have to face the part of themselves that failed you. They may tell themselves you were needy when you were asking for consistency. They may tell themselves you were emotional when you were asking for basic communication. They may tell themselves you were too much because calling you too much is easier than admitting they didn't show up enough. So the shame becomes hidden and it leaks out in strange ways. It might show up months later as a random hey, like nothing happened. It might show up as them watching your stories, liking your posts, hovering at the edge of your life without stepping in with honesty. It might show up as them reaching out when they feel lonely, not because they've healed, but because they want relief from the emptiness. And you might feel your heart lift when they appear, because you think, finally they feel it, finally they care. But you have to be careful because shame without accountability does not become love. It becomes avoidance again, just dressed in a softer outfit. And here's the part that will set you free if you let it. Their silence is not the final verdict on your worth. Their inability to admit it is not proof you didn't matter. It's proof that they don't know how to face themselves without running. They may carry shame in private. They may replay the moment they saw your face change. They may remember the way you tried to be calm while your voice trembled. They may feel a tightening in their chest when they pass a place that reminds them of you. They may think about you in waves late at night when distractions are gone. But if they don't have the capacity to sit in that discomfort and turn it into repair, then your healing cannot be dependent on their confession. Because the truth is, even if they admitted everything tomorrow, it would not give you back the parts of yourself you lost while waiting. It would not erase the nights you doubted yourself. It would not undo the way you started walking on eggshells, hoping not to trigger distance. Your healing begins the moment you stop needing the person who hurt you to validate the pain they caused. Your healing begins when you let your own heart be the witness. When you say, I know what happened, I know what I felt, I know what I deserved, and I will not keep begging for someone to admit what I already lived. So if you're still waiting for them to admit it, I want you to choose something stronger. Choose your peace over their pride. Choose your self-respect over their silence. Choose a life where love isn't something you have to extract from someone through suffering. Let them carry their shame or let them numb it. That's their journey. But you don't have to stay in the waiting room of their emotional maturity. You get to walk out. You get to stop chasing an apology and start building a future where you are loved out loud, consistently, safely with someone who doesn't run from the truth when it matters most. They replay what they did in private. And that sentence matters more than you think because it explains the cruelty of the silence without excusing it. You see the outside, the distance, the calm face, the cold timing, the way they moved on like nothing happened. You see the "I'm fine," the "it's not that deep," the "let's not make this a big thing." And you start believing the most painful story, that they never cared, that you were easy to replace, that your tears meant nothing. But for many avoidants, the pain isn't absent. It's hidden because the moment they get close to the truth, the moment they feel the weight of what they did, they don't lean in and speak. They protect their identity by acting unaffected because admitting they hurt you would force them to face a version of themselves they cannot tolerate. The version that wasn't kind, the version that wasn't fair, the version that took your love and left you with questions. And they've spent their whole life building a self-image that keeps them safe. The competent one, the independent one, the unbothered one, the one who doesn't need anyone. That identity is armor. So when shame shows up, they don't just feel regret, they feel threatened, they feel exposed. And instead of saying, "I did wrong," they often unconsciously choose the easier route. They rewrite the story so they can keep believing they're the good one. That rewriting can look like this. They'll tell themselves you were too emotional. They'll tell themselves you asked for too much. They'll say you created pressure. They'll say you were intense. They'll take the most human parts of you, your need for clarity, your need for reassurance, your need for consistency, and they will label it as drama because drama is easier than "I didn't show up." Drama lets them leave without accountability. Drama lets them sleep at night. Drama lets them escape the mirror that says, "You hurt someone who didn't deserve it." And meanwhile, you're left carrying the full reality alone. You're left sitting with your own memories. The moments you were gentle, the moments you tried to communicate, the moments you swallowed your pride and reached out again. You're left wondering which version of the story is true. You're left second-guessing your worth, your value, your sanity. And that is the part that hurts the most. Not just that they left, but that they left you holding the emotional truth while they walked away with a comfortable lie. But listen to me. Just because they don't admit it out loud doesn't mean it isn't happening inside them. Many avoidants replay the damage in flashes. They remember the look in your eyes when you realized they weren't coming closer. They remember your last message that was too calm, the one where you sounded tired instead of angry because tired is the sound of someone giving up. They remember the moment you stopped fighting, and that moment hits differently than any argument. Because arguments still mean you're invested. Silence means you're slipping away, and that is when their nervous system begins to react not with softness at first, but with confusion, because they don't know how to process closeness and loss in a healthy way. So the memory comes and it stings. They feel the heat of responsibility for a second, and then immediately they shut it down. They distract, they scroll, they work, they go out, they move to the next thing, and it looks like they're thriving. But often they're just avoiding their own inner world, because if they actually sit with the feeling, if they actually admit the truth, they would have to make a decision. They would have to apologize. They would have to own their behavior. They would have to risk being rejected. They would have to risk being seen as flawed. They would have to risk vulnerability. And vulnerability is the one place they don't know how to stand. This is why their silence can be so confusing. You want words. You want a clear sentence. You want "I'm sorry." You want "you mattered." You want "I didn't handle that right." But what you get is avoidance, because the moment they come close to those words, they feel shame, and shame feels like drowning. So they choose numbness. They choose distance. They choose pride. They choose the performance of being unaffected, because being unaffected allows them to keep their identity intact. It allows them to keep telling themselves, "I'm fine," even when they're not. And you need to understand this because it will save you from chasing the wrong thing. If you keep waiting for their admission, you are handing your healing to someone who is terrified of facing themselves. You are saying, "My closure depends on your courage," and that is not safe. That is not fair to you. Because even if they do feel shame, even if they do replay it, it doesn't automatically mean they will do the one thing that would help repair. Some people feel regret and still don't change. Some people feel guilt and still choose comfort. Some people miss you and still refuse accountability, because missing you is easier than becoming the person who can love you properly. So your power is this: stop needing them to confess in order for your reality to be real. Stop needing them to validate what you lived. Your pain is evidence. Your anxiety was evidence. The way you kept feeling unsure was evidence. The way you kept trying to earn consistency was evidence. You don't need them to admit it for it to be true. And the moment you stop begging for the words they can't say, you take your power back because your worth was never on trial. Your love was never the problem. The problem was that you offered your heart to someone who protects their identity more than they protect the relationship. Someone who would rather look fine than be honest. Someone who would rather be distant than be accountable. And you don't heal by proving yourself to that person. You heal by choosing yourself, by stepping out of the courtroom of their opinion and into the quiet certainty that you deserve better. You deserve someone who could face themselves, not run from what they caused. You deserve someone who could say, "I'm sorry," and mean it. Without needing to pretend they were never capable of hurting you in the first place, they miss you in waves. And that is the part you rarely get to see because you only witness the surface, the distance, the calm, the silence, the way they seem untouched by what happened. You're sitting there with a heart that feels like it was cracked open, replaying conversations, remembering the warmth, wondering how someone can be so close to you and then vanish. And all you want is the simplest human thing, a sign that you mattered. But avoidants often don't miss you the way you miss them. You miss them and you feel it immediately in your chest, in your throat, in your sleep, in the way you scroll through old messages like they're a lifeline. They miss you and it comes in flashes, in waves, often delayed. And when the wave rises too high, they detach again. Not because you didn't matter, but because the weight of guilt is unbearable for them to hold. Because guilt for an avoidant isn't just sadness, it's pressure, it's responsibility. It's the feeling of being emotionally tied to what they did, and emotional ties feel like danger to someone who survived life by staying untangled. So when they begin to miss you, when they begin to feel that pull, the first thing they feel is not romantic longing, it's tension. It's the fear of what closeness requires. They remember your softness, and in the same breath, they remember the moment they failed you. They remember the way you tried to talk and the way they shut down. They remember your disappointment and they feel the heat of shame. And instead of staying with that feeling and letting it turn into repair, they panic and they do what they always do when emotions rise, they withdraw. So the missing becomes complicated. It isn't just I miss her. It becomes if I miss her, it means I cared. If I cared, it means I hurt someone I cared about. If I hurt someone I cared about, it means I'm not as in control as I pretend to be, and suddenly missing you threatens their whole emotional system. That's why you might feel like they switch. One moment they seem fine, another moment they hover, one moment they're gone, another moment they send a casual message like nothing happened because their feelings come in waves. And the moment the wave feels too big, they try to shut the ocean down. And what does it look like when they shut it down? It looks like distraction. It looks like them working more. It looks like them going out. It looks like them acting cold. It looks like them telling themselves you were not right for them. It looks like them rewriting the story, not because it's true, but because it's easier than sitting with the guilt of what they did. It looks like them convincing themselves you were too emotional, because if you were too emotional, they don't have to admit they were emotionally unavailable. It looks like them acting as if your pain was dramatic, because if your pain was dramatic, they don't have to admit they caused it, but the wave returns. It always does. They will hear a song, they will pass a place, they will see someone with your laugh. They will have a quiet night where no one is texting them and the room is too still. And in that stillness, they feel you again. They remember how safe your love was. They remember how you tried. They remember the way you offered them understanding they didn't earn. And for a moment, their chest tightens, not with love alone, but with the awareness that they lost someone good. And that awareness is painful because it comes with a question they don't want to answer. Why did I run from what I actually wanted? But here's the problem. Awareness without capacity becomes avoidance again. They feel it and they don't know what to do with it. They feel the weight of reaching out. And reaching out means accountability. It means having to acknowledge what happened. It means having to risk rejection. It means having to say the words they've avoided their whole life. I was wrong. And that sentence is not just a sentence to an avoidant. It's an emotional surrender. It's letting go of the identity that says, I'm fine, I'm strong, I don't need anyone. So they choose the easier thing, silence, because silence lets them miss you without admitting they miss you. Silence lets them feel guilt without owning it. Silence lets them keep you in their mind without having to meet you in real life. And this is why you cannot measure your worth by their ability to show remorse. You can't build your healing on their confession because their shame blocks the very thing you want. They may miss you deeply and still never do the repair. They may feel regret in the middle of the night and still wake up and act cold. They may carry you in their memory and still protect their pride more than they protect the truth. And if you keep waiting for the wave to finally turn into action, you will stay stuck in the same place you were when they first hurt you, hoping they become the person you needed them to be. So here is what I want you to do. Stop asking, do they miss me? And start asking, can they hold me? Stop asking, do they feel guilty? And start asking, do they take responsibility? Because feelings without behavior are not a relationship. Missing you without repair is not love, it's longing. Regret without growth is not healing, it's repetition. And you deserve more than being a memory someone visits when they're lonely. Your closure is not in their wave, your closure is in your decision. The decision to stop living on the edge of someone's emotional capacity. The decision to stop romanticizing silence as depth. The decision to stop making your heart available to someone who only reaches for it when it feels safe for them. Because the truth is, if they ever come back in a healthy way, it won't be with a casual hey. It will be with accountability. It will be with consistency. It will be with changed behavior. And until that happens, your job is not to wait for their guilt to soften them. Your job is to choose a life where love is steady, where care is spoken, where remorse becomes repair, and where your heart is not something someone only appreciates after they've already walked away. Your healing is not dependent on their confession, and I need you to let that land, because the part of you that keeps waiting for them to finally admit it is the part of you that is still emotionally tied to the wound. You think the words will fix it. You think if they would just say, I'm sorry, with sincerity, the ache would soften, the replaying would stop. The questions would finally have an ending. You think if they would just admit you mattered, you would feel whole again. But the truth is, the closure you crave from them is the very thing their shame blocks. And if you keep making your peace dependent on their courage, you are putting your heart in the hands of someone who has already shown you that facing emotions is not their strength. Because look at what you've been living with. You've been living with the silence after the hurt, the distance after the vulnerability, the coldness after you tried to be honest. And that kind of pain doesn't just break your heart. It messes with your mind. It makes you negotiate with reality. It makes you rewrite what happened so you can keep hoping. It makes you tell yourself, maybe they didn't understand, maybe they were scared, maybe they were stressed, maybe I should have said it differently. And you keep turning yourself into the translator for their emotional absence. Because part of you believes if you can just explain it perfectly, they will finally step into the truth. But you need to hear this. You did not fail to communicate. They failed to meet you. And the hard part about loving someone avoidant is that your need for closure can become the chain that keeps you attached. You want the conversation because you want the ending to make sense. You want a confession because you want your pain validated. You want them to admit it because you want proof you weren't crazy for feeling what you felt. But you already have proof. You have your own experience. You have the nights you couldn't sleep. You have the way your chest tightened every time they went quiet. You have the way you kept checking your phone like it was deciding your worth. You have the way you started shrinking your needs just to keep the peace. That is not imagination. That is your nervous system telling you the truth. Something was not safe. So your healing begins when you stop asking them to be the witness of the damage they caused, and you become the witness for yourself. When you stop waiting for their apology and start giving yourself permission to move on without it. Because think about what it means to wait for their confession. It means you are asking the person who hurt you to also be the person who heals you. And that rarely works. Not because you don't deserve an apology, you do. Not because your pain isn't valid, it is. But because some people cannot face what they did without collapsing into shame, and instead of choosing growth, they choose distance, they choose denial, they choose pride, they choose the story where you were too much because it's easier than the story where they were not enough. And I want to speak to the part of you that still hopes they will come back and finally say the right thing. It's not weak to hope, it's human. Hope is how you stayed soft. Hope is how you kept believing love could become safe. But hope becomes painful when it turns into self-abandonment, when you keep your life on pause, when you keep your standards low just in case they return, when you keep reopening the wound to check if it still hurts. That is not love. That is attachment mixed with unfinished grief. And grief needs a decision. It needs a boundary. It needs a moment where you say, even if they never admit it, I will not keep living in this. Because the person you are becoming cannot be built on their words. The person you are becoming is built on your standards, built on your ability to choose peace, built on your willingness to stop negotiating with someone's inconsistency, built on your courage to accept the truth, that if they had the capacity to show up the way you needed, they would have. When someone wants to repair, they repair. When someone wants to understand, they lean in. When someone values you, they don't risk losing you repeatedly. And if you keep searching for a confession, you might miss the loudest confession of all, their behavior. So what does closure look like without their confession? It looks like you telling yourself the truth without softening it to protect them. It looks like you saying, I love someone who couldn't hold love. It looks like you saying, I tried and I'm proud of the way I showed up. It looks like you saying, I will not chase clarity from someone who runs from it. It looks like you letting your silence be clean, not as a tactic, but as a choice. It looks like you putting your hand on your own heart and admitting, this hurt me, and letting that be enough, because you don't need their permission to heal. You don't need their admission to move forward. You don't need them to agree with your reality for your reality to be real. And here's the part that changes everything. When you stop waiting for them to admit it, you stop giving them power over your emotional timeline. You stop letting their shame decide your peace. You stop letting their silence control your self-worth. You stop living in the hope of maybe, and you start living in the truth of I deserve better. You start choosing people who can communicate, people who can apologize, people who can repair, people who don't make you beg for the basics. If they ever do admit it one day, if they ever come to you with real accountability, that's their journey. And it might validate what you already knew. But your life cannot be built on a maybe. Your life cannot be built on someone else finally becoming emotionally brave. Your life is built on you, on the way you protect your heart now, on the way you raise your standards now, on the way you stop waiting and start living now. Because the most powerful closure you will ever get is the moment you look at yourself and say, I believe me. And then you walk forward, not bitter, not cold, just